Now, I think it's safe to say that this is the most useful shim in the entire world, aside from that one other shim that I will tell you about at the end of the video. But for this softwood edge grain razor fine shim, let me show you the absolute safest way to make one of these. Let's be honest, the conventional table saw jig method can be a little bit dangerous, and if you're not comfortable with the table saw, I wouldn't recommend trying it. Let's look at a much safer option over on the miter saw. Now there's a couple things that we need to overcome making these on the miter saw. The first thing is this gappy throat plate and the big gap at the back of the fence. This is not going to be ideal. Things are going to want to fall down here. The shims are going to want to shoot out the back. The best bet is to create one of these zero clearance cutting platforms here. To make one of these, all you need is some scrap plywood, 3/4 inch, 1/2 inch, whatever you have laying around. Now, the overall length is not that important, so I've heard. I've made mine just a little bit longer than the existing table. The height at the back here, you want to kind of match it up with the existing fence. And then this is the important part here, is the width. You want to make sure that you make it wide enough so that when you cut all the way through, you're not cutting this right in half. Screw this together. If you're going to be using screws, just make sure you pre-drill so you don't split the plywood. You could use a nail gun, and just make sure you don't put any fasteners right in the middle where you're going to be cutting through. Once you've got that installed, to install it, you just want to screw it in through the back fence. Now that we got that on, it's time to make some shims. When it comes to the material, any kind of softwood is going to be ideal. I've got some pine shelves that I've cut up. You want to avoid making the shims on the cross grain here. You want to go along the grain. If you make a cross grain shim, it's just going to be, got my gimbaled finger here, but it's just going to crumble apart. Anytime you're going to try to wedge that thing in, it's going to break apart. Very frustrating. So for the scrap wood, I like to cut it down to 6.5 inches. That's going to give you the perfect size shim to throw into your tool pouch, or it's going to be easy to store in an old coffee cup. Let's get to the cutting part here. Now, because this is a 90-degree cross-cut sled and you can't adjust the angle, otherwise you're going to mess everything up here, you need a key shim. So before you attach this, cut yourself a key shim. I like to cut it at 2.5 degrees. I find that is kind of the perfect slope. When you cut the key shim, make sure you leave a little bit of a snub nose on here. That is going to allow you to fit a bigger piece and not butt into the fence and change the angle. Now, because this is all square, the first cut is going to be with the key shim. So throw your key shim in here, and I like to always make the cuts so that the fat part of the shim is butting in here. If you cut it the other way around, that the narrow part could jam in here and it kind of wedges into the blade. Some bad things can happen. So I'll show you how to cut it so that that is not going to be the case. To get the first cut set here, what you want to do is use this key shim at the back here and then align it so that this front piece here is just going to be kind of a razor fine point at the front part of the blade. And then to make this a little bit quicker and it'll actually save this little piece from getting a little nub on the end, I like to just clamp on another piece of scrap wood right at the tail of the shim here. And you may need to adjust this depending on how things are cutting, but we'll get it started here. Get that clamped in. Everything's looking good. Whenever I use the miter saw, I always put on some hearing protection and eye protection. Yeah, so you're gonna wanna just keep that blade all the way down, let it slow down. If you start pulling it up while the blade is still spinning slowly, it can shoot things around. It's not really gonna be that dangerous, but it's probably a good practice. So you can see there on that initial cut, I've got just the perfect razor thin edge there. So that is a go. The next step here, you wanna remove the key shim, then you wanna just take this piece, flip it over, cut it, put the key shim back in, cut it again, remove the key shim, flip it over, yada, yada, yada. So you can make yourself a cup full of shims in a couple of minutes with this method. It's very safe. As the piece gets smaller and smaller, you definitely want to grab one of these $1 million sticks or make something similar. This is just the best tool in the entire world for holding small pieces with the miter saw. I will put the Amazon link for this in the description. You can also find it at local tool stores. You might be able to get a deal on it. If you have a miter saw, grab one of these sticks. They're the best. Make yourself a cup of shims. This is one of my favorite things in the entire world, as odd as that may seem. As for the most useful, handiest shim in the entire world, you gotta give the slight edge to the cedar door shim. Those shims are gonna be slightly less tapered. They're longer and bigger. They're the perfect shim for installing doors. If you wanna see how to install a door, the expert method that I perfected over a number of years, go ahead and check out this video right over here. We'll try one more time. Any kind of a soft word, oh my God, soft word. Soft word. Now, when I first came across these shims, I saw them making in a cat. What the fuck? It's going great.